Hello, welcome to Carrie's Kitchen. Today we are making Grandma Winifred's English chess tarts. To begin, we have a saucepan and 1 cup of raisins. I already checked the raisins to make sure that there were no stems attached, and I see that I missed one. Sometimes they'll have a hard little stem attached and you need to remove that. Next, we're going to add just enough water to cover the raisins. And we're going to add a half a teaspoon of rum extract. If you have real rum in the house, you could also use a couple of tablespoons of real rum in your raisin liquid. There we go. And then I'm going to turn the heat on to medium and heat these up until they just start to boil. Now, those are going to go into our chess tart filling. We also need to combine 1 cup of sugar, which I've already pre-measured, 4 egg yolks, so just the yolks of the eggs, and not the whites. Whenever I make English chess tarts, I save the egg whites for making coconut macaroon cookies, and that's the thing that we'll make next. We also need 4 tablespoons of milk. Now you could use canned evaporated milk, you can use regular milk, half and half, or cream. I happen to have some evaporated milk on hand, so that's what I'm using today. And the next thing we need is 1 stick of butter that is softened at room temperature. So I've already had this out softening for at least an hour. And we'll add that to our sugar and egg mixture. It's nice and soft. We also need to add a teaspoon of vanilla. This is a half teaspoon measurement, so I'm going to add 2. And we'll use our electric mixer to mix it up on low. Now our eggs and sugar and butter are thoroughly mixed. we're going to add 1 cup of chopped walnuts, and our raisins are also going to go into this mixture when they're finished. The reason why I cook the raisins with the water is because it plumps them up. It gives them a little hint of rum flavor, and they don't get too dried out in the baking process. A little bit more egg yolk in here. So we'll set this aside and get ready to make our... Now it's time to make our crust for our chest tarts. We're going to use our sifter, and we're going to use 2 cups of all-purpose flour, sifted with a half a teaspoon of regular salt. Next, we're going to cut in 1/3 of a cup of butter, and 1/3 of a cup of shortening. I like to use Crisco butter flavored baking sticks, but regular shortening is okay as well, in the can or by stick. Always make sure to wash your hands before you go to work in the kitchen, and regularly throughout the process. This is called a Pastry Blender. It's a special tool for cutting the shortening and butter into the dough. So we're going to start with the Pastry Blender. I learned how to make perfect pie crust from my mother-in-law, Kathy Henderson. So we cut the butter and shortening in until it has a crummy texture. And we'll clean off our Pastry Blender. It's important that your butter be room temperature. It will mix better if it is. And this is the secret to flaky crust. After you've used the Pastry Blender, you then use your fingers to finish mixing the butter and shortening into the flour, and that little bit of heat from your fingers is what helps the flour and shortening to really blend nicely, and you'll have a very nice flaky pie crust. So I'm just making this mixing it together until it resembles very fine crumbs. You definitely don't want to be wearing any jewelry on your hands when you're doing this. So this is very nicely mixed. I'll get the dough off of my fingers. Now the next thing you'll need is a fork. It doesn't have to be as large as mine, but I like to use this one. And a tablespoon measuring and some cold water. So this is cold water that I added an ice cube to make sure that it's nice and cold. That's another important note for making pie dough. So I'm going to take 1 tablespoon of water, sprinkle it over the dough, and it takes about 6 to 7. So you're going to do 1 tablespoon at a time, stirring to mix. So now we're at 3. Here's 4. 5. 6. Let's see how that holds together before we add another one. We don't want it to be too wet, but we also don't want it to be too dry. And I think it does need 1 more tablespoon. So we stir that until it holds together. Now it's time to start our pie crust. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on my pastry sheet. You can use a wooden board, you could use wax paper or parchment paper to roll your dough out on. And we have our mixed dough. I'm going to take half of that and lightly form it into a ball, and then flatten it out a little bit and turn it over on our floured surface. I have a wooden rolling pin. I want to get flour on that, and then roll the dough out to about 1/8 of an inch of thickness. So we're going to roll from all the sides. When I was younger, I used to be afraid of making pies because I was inexperienced with making pie crust. So in my early 20s, I practiced making pies a lot so that I would no longer be afraid of the crust. So now we have some nice crust. We have a cupcake pan. And I have a glass with a wide edge, and I'm just going to cut circles with my glass. Any round cutter will work. This one's a little over 4 inches in diameter. And take my piece of crust and fit it into my little muffin pan. You don't grease the muffin pan. There's already enough butter in the crust. Sometimes I make a bigger crust and crimp the edges, but these I'm making the crust fit right inside. This one feels a little bit too thick for me, so I'm just flattening it out a little bit more. You want to handle your pie crust as little as possible. Tougher pie crust is because it's been handled too much or you haven't followed the proper procedure with the ingredients. So I'll continue to roll out dough until I have all of my muffin tins filled. And then we'll be ready to finish the filling. Our raisins have had time to cool and they're drained. We're going to add those to our filling. We'll stir that in so that our raisins and walnuts are nicely mixed. English chess tarts are a little bit like southern pecan pie, but not quite as sweet. We have our tarts lined with pastry. And now I just want to spoon some filling in. Almost about to the edges of the pastry. That one's a little full, so I might need to take some out. Take a little bit out so it's not overflowing. That should be okay. So we're going to place a little bit of filling into each pastry cup. So I have 15 tarts. This recipe makes 12 to 15 depending on how high you make the crust in the pan. There's a few spots where I dripped a little bit of the filling, and so I want to clean that up before it goes into the oven. I've already preheated our oven to 425 degrees, and these take 20 to 25 minutes to bake. So I'm going to put a pan in the oven right now. We'll set our timer for 22 minutes. And I have the oven light on, and I can see through the windowed oven door to make sure that they're not getting too brown on top. I also lined a cookie sheet with aluminum foil. When there's always a little bit of pie crust dough left over after you're making a pie. And when my husband was a little boy, his mother used to give him the leftover dough to let him roll out and cut and make into what they call crust cookies. So that's something that is still very special, a nice childhood memory for him. So I always take the leftover dough and then just cut it into cookies for him. And I place them on a lined, ungreased cookie sheet. You could cut them into shapes if you want to, but he's happy just to have them cut and baked. And then to make these extra special for him, sometimes I will sprinkle cinnamon sugar on top, but he likes sugar sprinkles. So I'll do sugar sprinkles on top. And when my tarts finish baking, I'll put these in the oven for about 10 minutes, and he'll have a surprise treat of some crust cookies. So now our crust cookies are ready to go into the oven. We'll put them in to bake when the tarts are done. All of our tarts have finished baking, so now the crust cookies can go into the oven. And we'll set the timer for those. These have had 25 minutes to cool, so they should be ready to come out of the pan. You just slide your knife around the edge. And look at what a beautiful tart that is. Perfect all the way around. These are my godfather's favorite thing that his mother used to make. And when she would make them for her church ladies to come over and visit, he would get very upset if he saw any partially eaten chess tarts left on a plate. He thought, what a terrible waste that those ladies would not finish their tarts. And they are his absolute favorite thing. So whenever it's his birthday, Christmas, Father's Day, whatever excuse I can find, I like to make these tarts for him. He is going to be 92 years old this September. And Father's Day is coming up this weekend. So that's one reason why I'm busy making tarts. Now, I usually allow myself to sample if I could find an ugly tart. If I find one that I don't think is as pretty as the others, I'll allow myself to sample that one. And the way to serve a chess tart is to top it with whipped cream. I like homemade whipped cream, but you can use homemade whipped cream, out of a can or Cool Whip. And now there's our tart ready to eat. Some people like to also garnish with a maraschino cherry on top, but this is perfect. Thank you for watching, and remember to season everything with love.